When I became paralyzed in 2016, the wheelchair became a tool of freedom for me. Here's part 3 of my story. Let's get into it. Greetings all and welcome to The Pivot Point. I'm Tyron Harding. In my previous videos, I discussed how I was paralyzed and what happened when I arrived at the hospital. If you've missed those videos, I'll leave a link down below to the playlist where you can go and watch those videos first. Arriving at Summit Rehab at Muirmed Hospital, I was introduced to a whole team that would be looking after me. This included everyone from specialist doctors to a psychologist to an array of therapists. If you do not know the value of a good physiotherapist or a good occupational therapist, it is clear that you are lucky enough to never have needed one. Up until that point, I had spent the previous 9 weeks confined to a hospital bed. So being told that I would start using a wheelchair was actually a sense of relief for me. It was a sense of freedom. I would be able to move around by myself, get to where I need to go. It was freedom that I had not had for 9 entire weeks. And it only took them 8 weeks to get me from too weak to sit up by myself to being pretty much independent and being able to go home. Everything changed for me going from able-bodied to disabled. Depending on the level of injury, different things can be expected. My level is L1, L2, complete technically with sparing. What this means is that my paralyzation starts from my waist down. The sparing means that I have some sensation below my level of injury, and in my case, I have 3 muscles in my right leg that have returned either fully or partially. A few things people don't normally know about spinal cord injuries. I, for instance, suffer from nerve pain. This is a constant pain in my legs that comes from the spinal cord being jumbled up by my incident. Essentially what happens is it becomes a case of broken telephone. The signals from my legs get broken up by the spinal cord that is damaged. When the signals reach the brain says, I don't know what to do with this, so it must be pain. Other people suffer from spasticity, where the legs will pull or kick by themselves and they have no control over it. My bladder and bowels are also affected. This is probably one of the worst parts of the spinal cord injury for me personally. Because of the low level that your bladder and bowels connects to your spine, there are people who have recovered the ability to walk but still have issues with their bladder and bowels. For me, it was one of the biggest issues that I faced. It was demoralizing knowing that I can have an accident at any point and my body literally has no control over it. Luckily, they equip you with techniques and routines and everything you need to set up life at home to avoid these kind of issues. The physiotherapy I received was probably one of the hardest parts about the rehab stage. There were days where I suspected that my therapists enjoyed punishing their patients. Then there were other days where I knew they enjoyed punishing their patients. But that punishment led to me being strong enough in only 8 weeks that I could leave the rehab and go back to a semi-normal life. Going from not being able to sit up by myself in bed to leaving in only 8 weeks is amazing. I owe that team a lot. My occupational therapist was just as amazing. Again, worth her weight in gold. She would teach me all the practical aspects of living in a wheelchair, how everything changes now that I have a spinal cord injury and how I need to adapt to those situations. The first thing she made me do was something I thought was ridiculous at the time, but now I realize it makes sense. The first task? Putting on pants while lying down. This sounds simple, but it was so frustrating and so annoying at the time. Apparently there's a technique to it, and the thought process is that I would be doing this twice a day, every day, for the rest of my life. So knowing the correct way to do it just makes life easier, and it truly has. I missed the old days of just being able to stand up, put my leg through one hole in the pants, put my other leg through the other hole, and just pull up the pants and zip up and go. It's not that easy anymore. Knowing the correct way to do things just makes life easier, And this applies to everything else that she taught me as well. Everything from transferring to and from the wheelchair, loading my wheelchair into the car by myself, getting in and out of the bath by myself, pivoting on my back wheels. Everything becomes easier when you know exactly how to do it. One of the scariest things that my occupational therapist made me do was to learn to pop a wheelie in the wheelchair, to pivot onto the back wheels. In the beginning, I fell a lot, but eventually I got the hang of it and I started doing it for fun. That's why my YouTube channel name and my company name is The Pivot Point, because I spend most of my time on my back wheels. The other thing that she made me do that was completely scary was to hop off of a curb. It's only about that high, but when you're hopping off in a wheelchair, it is the freakiest thing you have to do. We had many arguments, but now I do it regularly when I need to. This is a technique that helps me navigate the world that isn't very wheelchair accessible. Eventually, I was discharged after 8 weeks in the rehab facility. Returning home meant I had to adapt to a whole new lifestyle. Keep an eye out for the next video where I'll be covering this. A couple of lessons has stuck with me from my stay in the rehab. The first happened probably in the first week that I was there. I remember rolling down the hallway and I saw a young lady in the rehab facility. She wasn't a patient, but this is a young, well-dressed woman, and my first thought when I saw her was, shame, that poor woman having to live her life in a wheelchair. Admittedly, it took about 5 seconds for the penny to drop. I'm in a wheelchair. Do I want people to look at me with pity the way I looked at her? Of course not. That's when I realized that I am responsible for setting the precedent on how people see me. I need to change the way people perceive those with disabilities. The second lesson came one day in the rehab gym. We were busy doing group exercises together, and there was one patient who was just not willing to put in any effort. This patient's level of injury is pretty much the same as mine, but you could see that they had no drive to improve themselves. When the therapists asked them to do something, they would argue. When they did actually do the exercises, they would do it half-heartedly. And this was frustrating to watch. I remember after the exercise, I was sitting with a quadriplegic friend of mine, who his injury is much higher than mine, so he can do much less. But he said to me it annoyed him to see someone that is able to do things but refuses to, whereas he can only do a certain amount of stuff, but he makes sure that he does every single thing that he can. I realized that I'm still lucky. I need to make the best of my situation, and I always need to put in the effort to improve myself where I can. Despite all the things that I had to learn in the rehab, from toileting routines all the way through to utilizing a wheelchair to navigate the world, to having to learn to put on pants lying down. The biggest thing I had to learn was a mindset shift. I realized I am now disabled, and either I let this drag me down, or I play the hand that I have been dealt to the best of my ability, and that is what I have done. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video where I'll be covering how I returned to a semi-normal life after becoming paralyzed. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.